Okay, I'm going to talk about my portfolio. So here on the front cover, I have my word art of different words that are important to me in my philosophy. And I did it in such a way that the biggest words held the most importance to me, and then they get smaller as they become less of a priority for me. So as you can see, my name is the biggest because I find that I'm very important. Um, but I have words on here like trust and love and validation and respect, and exemplar, and things like that that are the most important. And then smaller words that are just not quite as much of a priority in my mind as I start teaching and as I develop my teaching philosophy. Um, in my teaching philosophy, I identify as a medium low control teacher. I see eye to eye with a lot of things that Jim Fay says. Jim Fay was the love and logic philosopher, and I really liked that about him. I liked that he talked about loving your students and about showing them that validation and encouragement. He also talked about student autonomy, which I agree with a lot, as well as natural consequences. But somewhere in my philosophy where I kind of branch off from what Fay says is that I think that one of the most important things in my philosophy is citizenship. I think that a teacher's role is to teach more than just academics, but to teach how students are going to be able to be good citizens in the future, how they're going to be beneficial members of society by gaining the ability to work together, to problem solve, to think critically, to be respectful, different things like that. And I think that that's one of the most important things that a teacher can do. So that's a big part of my philosophy, and that's kind of something that I'll continue to touch on throughout the rest of my portfolio. So, second, I have my democratic classroom. And Sister Pincock, you've already seen this, so I won't touch on all of it. But I did want to talk about one section here that I really liked, which is the classroom jobs section, because I think that goes really well with my philosophy. So I chose a couple different classroom jobs to talk about in this. They include table captain, line monitor, trash monitor, paper returner, and librarian. And the reason that I chose those amongst others is because I think that they help students to be better citizens. They're not just jobs for the fun of it or for having something interesting to do, but they're jobs that are actually going to help students to be responsible, to work hard, to make a difference in the classroom. And I think that's something that, giving a child a job just for the fun of it doesn't really do very much for them. But giving them a job to help them learn how to be members of society is something that actually is going to help them in the future. So next I have my rules and procedures page. And so it talks about the different rules and things that I would implement. But one thing that I really liked is the idea of the children helping to make the rules and then also posting the rules in the classroom. We talked about that in class, and that was something that really stood out to me because I believe that as a student can be able to see the rules and look at them, and if something comes up and they need to be taken care of for some sort of misbehavior, I think being able to see those rules and say, I misbehaved, I remember we talked about them, those are the rules that we all agreed on, and I didn't do it, then dealing with those consequences isn't quite so bad, and it places the accountability on the student rather than on the teacher, where the student can't really think, oh, my teacher's so mean, she's enforcing these rules with this iron fist instead of thinking about me and what I need, but this student can say, what, I did this wrong and I need to fix it. And that's something that they'll need to do in real life too. Something that once they grow up and go into the real world, they're gonna need to solve problems and work through things like that. So I really like that aspect of it. So next I have my intentions for motivation. So when I first started thinking about this and when we first were writing this paper, I thought intrinsic is the best one, and you shouldn't do anything with extrinsic motivation in the classroom because it's not as good, it's not as persuasive, it's not as long-lasting, things like that. But what I came to realize actually is that extrinsic motivation does a lot for helping children to do things that they maybe wouldn't have done before. And I really like that idea. So something that, giving them these extrinsic motivations, for example, I have on here the idea of praise, giving specific praise Giving time rewards, I believe a lot in time rewards rather than something tangible. Extra time for recess or reading or arts and crafts or things like that. That as they have those motivators, they'll try new things and they'll start doing things that maybe they wouldn't have chosen to do before. And that hopefully those extrinsic motivators will help them to start new things that will lead them to gain an intrinsic motivation. There are two things that I think intrinsic motivation works the best, or are good options for using intrinsic motivation. And that is pointing out, one of those is pointing out when students maybe don't realize the intrinsic motivators that they're experiencing. So for example, to point out and say, wow, you guys are working so great as a group. Doesn't that make this so much more peaceful and so much more fun? Or wow, you had success in this. Doesn't it feel great to experience that or to gain knowledge and have that with you? Don't you feel strong? Don't you feel good about that? And helping students to have that feeling of accomplishment and then be able to gain their own intrinsic motivation. So on my next page about prevention, along the bottom there I have just my procedures, but those are pretty basic, just entering the classroom at the beginning of the day, morning meetings, and then also lining up. But I wanted to talk about my points at the top here, which are about building positive rapport with my students. There's two different phrases that I have on here about how I want to gain that positive rapport. The first one is about getting to know my students and letting my students get to know each other. So I feel like as we get to know each other, that's something that's going to help us connect more and have a better experience in the classroom. And that would include doing morning meetings, telling personal stories, and then also through sharing classwork. So if a student writes something that's really good and wants to share it. And hopefully that will help them to develop better relationships and bonds with people in the classroom. And my second point that will build positive rapport is through respect. I value respect a lot, and I think that it's very important to have in the classroom. And I also believe that it goes both directions, that I can't expect my students to respect me unless I respect them first. So I believe that respecting students and them respecting me is something important for them to learn, and that's something also that's going to benefit them in the future, is learning to show respect and be thoughtful and things like that. So I also have my intervention page here, and I like about this page, first off, that it's in our portfolio, so that when these specific situations come up, which I'm sure they will, they're very general scenarios, I can remember the different things that I thought of before I'm in a stressful situation, and how I can implement them. But I really, with what Jim Fay says, who's the philosopher that I see eye to eye with the most, he talks about natural consequences, and I really like that, and I'd like to do that in my classroom, because that kind of goes along with my philosophy of citizenship, that I think that as students have natural consequences of things that are actually going to happen to them in real life, and as they learn to not only accept that they've done things wrong, but then make changes and find solutions and improve on themselves. I think that's something that's actually applicable. That's something that it's not just putting them in timeout, because that's never going to happen in the real world, but that they have to see what they did wrong, see how it affected others, and then make decisions to improve it. So that's kind of where I stand on intervention. And then finally, I have my classroom map. And my classroom map is set up so that they are in groups here, and they can work with their groups and get to know individuals, and then that would likely change up a couple times throughout the year. And then also we have over here the group area, where we can get together as a class, work together as a class, brainstorm ideas together. And then we have just different areas for them to read and to work with me, and the different areas right there. But hopefully that would help them to be able to feel comfortable and feel safe within the classroom, so that they can have a good learning experience in the classroom. So anyways, that's my portfolio, and so thanks.